It was the kind of winter that silences the world, where even the trees forget how to whisper. Beneath that heavy sky, a boy and his little sister walked away from the only home they had ever known. Ethan was just 14, but his shoulders carried a man's burden. Beside him, Lily clutched her old stuffed bear, too young to understand the word goodbye, yet old enough to feel its weight. Behind them, the last light from their cabin window flickered and died. Ahead, only snow, wind, and the long road into nowhere. But they were not alone. At their side walked Ranger, a German shepherd with eyes that had seen both danger and devotion. His paws broke the path before them. His breath rose like smoke in the frozen air, a guardian sent by grace itself. No money, no family, no promise of tomorrow, only a boy, a girl, and a dog. Bound by something greater than fear, love, loyalty, and a fragile hope that maybe, somewhere ahead, God was still watching. This is their story, of survival, faith, and the quiet miracles that still walk among us. Before we start Journey, please take a few seconds to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? Chapter 1, Winter on Ashwood Hill. Snow had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the rolling hills of Ashwood into a world of silence and white breath. The small wooden cabin where Ethan Carter lived creaked under the weight of frost, its chimney coughing a thin line of smoke into the gray morning. Inside, the boy sat by the window, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug of weak tea, staring at the horizon as if waiting for the world to give him an answer. Ethan was 14, tall for his age, though his shoulders had begun to curve forward from years of carrying firewood and worry. His dark hair fell messily over sharp gray eyes that always seemed older than they should be. He had his father's hands, calloused and sure, but his mother's quiet face, the kind that looked like it could break if someone spoke too loudly. Since her death 2 years ago, he'd become both brother and parent to his little sister Lily. Lily was 8, a small thing with sunlit curls that refused to obey the brush. Her cheeks were still round, her eyes green and endlessly curious, like she hadn't yet learned the world could take things away. She sat cross-legged on the floor, stitching a hole in her ragged mittens. Each time she pulled the thread too tight, she made a soft, oops, then grinned at her mistake as though it were something pretty. Near the door, stretched across the worn rug, lay Ranger, a German shepherd with a thick winter coat and eyes the color of wet amber. He was 6 years old, broad-shouldered, and scarred from protecting the family's sheep before the flock had to be sold. He carried himself with the dignity of an old soldier, every movement deliberate, but his loyalty burned like a quiet fire. He never let Ethan or Lily out of sight. Their father, Thomas Carter, used to say Ranger was half wolf, half angel. Thomas was a railroad worker, a man of calloused laughter and soot-streaked skin. His beard, dark and coarse, always smelled faintly of oil and pine sap. Since his wife's death in a winter flood, something in him had gone dim, though he never let his children see. He'd taken a job far away, promising it was only until spring, just long enough to fix what's broken, he had said. But spring never came early to Ashwood Hill. That morning, the knocking on the door came like a crack of thunder. Ranger lifted his head, ears pricked. Ethan opened the door to find Sarah Miller, their neighbor, standing against the wind. She was a widow in her 40s, thin and angular as a fence post, wrapped in a heavy wool coat that couldn't hide the hollowness beneath. Her eyes were red, and her gloved hands trembled as she clutched a telegram. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice nearly drowned by the wind, "I'm so sorry." He didn't take the paper at first. He didn't have to. He'd seen that kind of sorrow before, in the doctor's face the night his mother died. When he finally reached out, the cold metal taste of dread filled his mouth. The words on the telegram blurred. Accident on site. Thomas Carter. No survivors. Lily's mittens slipped from her hand. "What does it say, Ethan?" He tried to speak, but no sound came out. Ranger whined and pressed his head against Ethan's knee. Sarah stepped inside, her eyes searching the small room filled with silence. There's talk the county might send someone," she murmured. "You're both still minors. They'll find you a place in town." Ethan stared at the fire, its light dancing on the cracked walls. "A place in town?" he repeated, his voice dull. "You mean an orphanage?" Sarah hesitated. "It's only until they find a family." He looked at Lily, who sat clutching Ranger's fur, her lips trembling. A family? He already had one, just smaller now, quieter, but still breathing. That night, After Sarah left, the cabin grew colder. The wind moaned through the chimney like an old ghost. Ethan lay awake beside the dying fire, staring at the ceiling. He could hear Lily's soft breaths and Ranger's steady heartbeat near his feet. He thought of his father's voice. "Be strong for her, son, no matter what comes." The words felt heavier than the blanket. When dawn came, Sarah returned with 2 men from the county. One was short and stout, with a black mustache that looked like it had been glued on wrong. The other, tall and pale, wore a gray coat too clean for the mud around his boots. They spoke in low, clipped voices, asking Ethan if there were relatives nearby. He said no. They asked if he understood what protective custody meant. He said nothing. Lily clung to him as they talked about temporary housing and placement forms. He felt her shaking through her thin sweater. Something inside him broke. That evening, when the men left to prepare the paperwork, Ethan packed a small satchel, some bread, a half-full canteen, their mother's locket. He tied his father's red scarf around Lily's neck and whispered, "We're going home." "Home?" she asked, her eyes wide. "To Grandpa's cabin," he said. "Up on the mountain." Lily hesitated. "But it's been empty for years." Ethan smiled, though his eyes didn't. "Then it's waiting for us." Ranger barked once, as if in agreement, tail sweeping the floor. When the town fell asleep, they slipped into the night. The snow had stopped, but the wind still carried the scent of pine and frost. Ranger led the way, his paws silent against the white earth. Lily followed close, holding Ethan's hand. Behind them, the faint light of Ashwood flickered and vanished into the mist. Ahead, the forest rose like a wall of shadows. Ethan took one last look at the town below and whispered, "We'll be fine. We have each other." But as they entered the trees, Ranger suddenly froze, ears up, muscles tense. Somewhere in the darkness, a sound echoed, faint but sharp, like metal, scraping against stone. Ethan turned toward it, heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Ranger growled low, staring into the woods. And then, just for a moment, Ethan thought he saw a flicker of light, far ahead, deep in the forest, where no one should have been. Chapter 2. The Old Cabin and the Lantern Promise. The forest thickened as the children climbed higher. The moon hung low, a silver coin above the black ridges, and every tree groaned under the weight of frost. Ethan led the way, clutching a lantern that sputtered each time the wind howled through the pines. Ranger moved ahead of him, ears high, tail low, his breath forming pale ghosts in the air. Behind them, Lily stumbled through the snow, her small hand clinging to the edge of Ethan's coat. By the time they reached the ridge, the lantern's flame was nearly out. Before them stood what was left of their grandfather's cabin. The roof had half collapsed. The walls leaned as if they were tired of standing. Smoke-black stains crawled up from the old chimney, and the windows were blind with grime. A crow cried once from a branch and flew into the dark. Lily's voice trembled. "It's broken, Ethan. We can't live here." He forced a smile. "Then we'll fix it." Ethan pushed open the door. The hinges screeched, and a gust of cold air carried the smell of rot and dust. Inside, moonlight leaked through holes in the roof, tracing silver lines across the floor. Furniture lay in ruin, a chair missing a leg, a table split down the middle, and a bed frame without a mattress. He set down the lantern and tried to steady his voice. "See? Still standing. That means it's waiting for us." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "I want to go home." He wanted to say this is home, but the words stuck in his throat. Ranger sniffed the corners of the room, tail swishing gently, then gave a sharp bark near the hearth. Curious, Ethan followed. The dog's claws scratched against a loose floorboard. Together they pried it open, revealing a small, dust-covered chest wrapped in burlap. The lock had long rusted away. Inside lay a few items wrapped in faded cloth. A hunting knife, a brass compass, a tin box of matches, and an old leather-bound book. Its cover cracked and worn. Ethan opened it. Across the first yellowed page, written in slanted handwriting, were the words, "For whoever carries the Carter name, may these hills never defeat you." It was his grandfather's journal. Grandfather Henry Carter had been a lumberman once, before the mines came. People in Ashwood used to call him Iron Henry, a giant of a man with a beard that reached his collarbone and a laugh that could scare off wolves. But the woods took his wife, then his leg, and eventually his will to leave the mountain. Ethan had only seen him once as a baby, though his father used to say, "He didn't survive the mountain, he married it." Ethan brushed the dust off the next page and began to read aloud. It was full of sketches, traps, plant drawings, notes on boiling water, and finding edible roots. His hands trembled slightly as the lantern flickered. The journal felt like a voice from another world, a hand reaching across generations. Lily crouched beside him. What does it say? He smiled faintly. It says we can live here, if we're smart. It says there's a spring nearby and there's a trick to fixing the chimney. It says, it's not impossible. Her tears slowed. Ranger lay down beside her, his head resting on her lap. She stroked his fur absent-mindedly. If Grandpa could do it, maybe we can too. That's the spirit, Ethan said, though exhaustion hung heavy in his voice. He gathered scraps of wood from the floor, scraped some bark, and with trembling hands struck a match. The first two died in the wind. The third caught, licking the bark with a shy flame. Lily gasped softly as warmth bloomed in the hearth for the first time in years. Ethan sat back, watching the fire catch. We'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, we start fixing the roof. Lily nodded sleepily, curling up under her coat beside Ranger. The dog kept one ear lifted, his eyes alert even as he pretended to rest. Outside, the wind clawed at the windows, but the small light of their fire pushed back the dark. Ethan turned a few more pages of the journal. In the back, between notes on weather and woodcraft, he found something else. A folded map drawn in pencil, marked with an X just beyond a stream labeled Silver Brook. Beside it, a line was written in shaky cursive. The day I stop fearing the dark is the day I can return home. He frowned. His grandfather had never returned to town before he died. What had he meant by that? A noise interrupted his thoughts, a faint scraping outside. Ranger's head snapped up, growl low and steady. Ethan rose quickly, gripping the knife he'd found in the chest. The firelight danced over his face, turning his eyes into steel. Probably just the wind, he whispered, though his heart said otherwise. He moved to the window. The trees beyond swayed in the gale, but there was something else. Tracks in the snow, too large for a fox, too deep for a deer. They led toward the woods and disappeared behind a fallen pine. Ethan's breath clouded against the glass. Someone's been here, he murmured. Ranger barked once, low and sharp. Lily stirred in her sleep. What is it? She mumbled. Ethan hesitated, staring at the footprints. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of orange between the trees, like a lantern swinging in the wind. But when he blinked, it was gone. He turned back toward the fire, whispering to himself, tomorrow, we'll find out. Outside, unseen by the children, the wind shifted. The tracks near the fallen pine slowly filled with snow, erasing every trace of whoever or whatever had been there. Chapter 3. The Footprints in the Snow. The morning after the storm dawned pale and sharp, the kind of cold that made the air itself ring. Frost had glazed the windows of the old cabin, and every breath Ethan took looked like a small ghost escaping his mouth. He woke before Lily, before even Ranger stirred, and stepped outside into the biting silence. The snow from the night before had settled thick and untouched, except for the footprints. They were still there, leading away from the house toward the dark line of trees. He knelt, brushing away a crust of frost. The prints were deep, heavy, too wide for a fox or bear. Whoever had been here, they'd been human, and they'd been close. Ethan followed them for several paces until the tracks curved downhill, vanishing behind a drift. He hesitated. Something inside him, perhaps the same quiet instinct that had kept them alive so far, whispered not to go further. He turned back toward the cabin, where a thin ribbon of smoke rose from the patched chimney. Inside, Lily was stirring the last of their cornmeal into a dented pot, humming softly to herself. Ranger sat beside her, his eyes half closed but his ears pricked. "You went outside again," she said, glancing up. "Did you see anything?" "Nothing," Ethan lied. "Just snow." Lily gave him a look that said she didn't believe him, but decided not to ask more. "The fire's dying," she murmured. "I'll fix it." The next hours blurred into the rhythm of survival. Ethan used salvaged boards from the fallen shed to patch holes in the roof. Lily, small and nimble, swept the floor and arranged stones around the hearth, like she'd seen her mother do years ago. From the pocket of her old coat, she pulled out a handful of dry, wrinkled beans, souvenirs from another life. "Mama said these would grow anywhere," she said. "Maybe they'll grow here, too." She pressed them gently into the soil beside the cabin, her fingers red from the cold. By noon, Ranger brought back a gift from the forest, a limp snow hare, its fur adusted with ice. Ethan praised him softly and cleaned the kill with careful hands. The meal was small but warm, and for the first time in days, Lily smiled. That night, however, peace shattered again. Ranger began growling long before Ethan heard the sound. It started as a soft crunch, snow shifting under weight, then a faint clatter, metal against rock. Ethan grabbed the lantern, heart thundering. Through the frosted glass of the window, he saw movement, a flicker of shadow sliding between the pines. He whispered, "Stay with Lily," and stepped outside. The air bit his skin like glass. He raised the lantern, the flame casting a trembling circle of light. "Hello?" he called. "Is someone there?" No answer. Ranger bounded ahead, barking once, twice, then disappeared into the trees. Ethan ran after him, boots crunching over frozen ground. The light wavered as he stumbled through, drifts until he reached the edge of the creek. There, half buried in snow, lay a man. He was sprawled on his side, one arm outstretched as though he'd been crawling toward the water. His coat was torn, soaked through with ice. A short, jagged piece of metal protruded from his leg, and his face, pale, sharp-boned, unshaven for days, was dusted with frost. His lips moved faintly, whispering nonsense. Ethan knelt beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man groaned, eyes fluttering open. They were gray, the color of cold steel, yet not cruel, more exhausted than afraid. "Bridge," he rasped. "Collapsed. I lost my crew." Ethan looked down at his coat, a dark wool uniform lined with faded gold trim. A small insignia gleamed weakly on the breast, Collins Rail Company. "Don't talk," Ethan said. "You're hurt." With effort that felt older than his years, he heaved the man onto his shoulder, half dragged, half carried him back toward the cabin. Ranger trotted ahead, clearing the path, barking encouragement into the storm. Lily gasped when Ethan stumbled inside. "Who is he?" "I don't know yet," Ethan panted, "but he's freezing to death." They laid the stranger near the hearth. Lily fetched their one blanket, while Ethan pulled the metal shard from the man's leg and wrapped it tightly in cloth. Ranger lay close, lending his warmth. After a few minutes, the man coughed violently, then exhaled with a sound halfway between pain and relief. When he finally spoke again, his voice was hoarse but steady. "Name's Samuel Collins," he said. "Rail engineer. We were repairing a bridge near Silver Brook when it gave out. Thought I could find the trail back to camp. Guess I found something else instead." Ethan studied him, the angular jaw dusted with a week's beard, the furrowed lines carved deep into his forehead. This was a man built of hard years and harder regrets. "You're safe now," Ethan said quietly. Collins gave a small laugh that turned into a cough. "Kid, I've been through 3 winters in the Rockies. Safe doesn't exist up here." He glanced at the siblings, his gaze softening. "You two alone?" Ethan nodded slowly. "It's just us, and Ranger." Collins looked at the dog, who met his eyes calmly. "Good breed," he murmured. "Smart, loyal, the kind that never leaves you behind." He leaned back, exhaustion pulling at him. Yet there was something warm behind his weariness, an echo of gratitude. "You shouldn't have helped me," he muttered. "Could have been anyone." Ethan shook his head. "Could have been my father." For a long moment, only the crackle of fire answered them. Then Collins whispered, almost to himself, "You remind me of him, before the war." His voice drifted into sleep. Ethan sat beside the dying flame, watching snow drift against the window. His thoughts churned like the river beyond. A stranger had appeared from the forest, injured, lost, yet somehow familiar. The footprints, the glimmer of lantern light, it all made sense now. But what was a rail engineer doing this deep in the mountain, far from any working line? Lily's small voice broke the silence. "Is he going to stay with us?" Ethan hesitated. "For now, yes." Ranger stirred, ears flicking toward the door. The wind carried a low, distant rumble, like the sound of metal bending under weight. Thunder, maybe, or something else. Ethan stared into the dark beyond the window and whispered, "Something's coming." Chapter 4. Ranger and the Lost Day. The storm arrived like a living thing, crawling down from the high ridges with a roar that swallowed the forest whole. By dawn, the cabin was buried in white. The windows were opaque with frost, and even the air inside seemed frozen solid. Ethan woke to the sound of the roof groaning under snow. Every log in the cabin cracked and sighed like an old man's bones. Mr. Collins was already up, crouched near the hearth. His once proud wool coat now hung loose on his frame, patched at the elbows by Lily's small, clumsy stitches. He had shaved with Ethan's father's knife, revealing a face marked by fine lines and the faint scar that ran from his jaw to his temple. His eyes, cold gray and perpetually calculating, softened when he noticed the boy watching him. "Morning, Captain," Collins said, his voice rough but kind. "Another day in paradise." Ethan smiled faintly. "The fire's dying again." "I know." Collins tossed 2 more sticks into the flames. "If we don't fix the chimney draft soon, we'll be cooking smoke instead of soup." The man moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent years solving problems under pressure. Once he told Ethan about his time designing rail bridges through canyons where one wrong bolt could cost a dozen lives. After a collapse years ago, one he blamed himself for, he'd sworn never to lead a crew again. "Sometimes," he'd said quietly, "failure teaches you more than victory ever will. But it doesn't make sleeping any easier." Now he had found a small purpose again in this cabin, teaching Ethan to draw maps, to mark streams, to measure distance by the sun. Under his guidance, the boy's sketches grew precise, confident. "Maps," Collins said once, tapping Ethan's paper, "are promises on paper. They say, 'I will not get lost again.'" Lily sat nearby, her legs tucked under her, humming softly as she ran her fingers through Ranger's thick fur. She sang the same tune every morning, a lullaby their mother used to hum while kneading bread. Her voice was small but sweet, the only thing delicate left in their world of ice and wood smoke. Ranger, sprawled on the rug like a lion, closed his amber eyes, tail thumping in rhythm. By midday, their rations had dwindled to almost nothing. Collins and Ethan rationed what remained: 1 crust of bread, a few roots, and melted snow for water. "We'll need to hunt soon," Collins said, "once the storm calms." But the storm didn't calm. By the 3rd day, the world outside had turned to white chaos. Even the trees were ghosts. That morning, while Ethan and Collins patched the stove, Ranger began pacing near the door, restless. His ears twitched at something neither human could hear. Then, without warning, he gave a sharp bark and bolted out into the storm. "Ranger!" Lily shouted, dropping her cup. She ran to the window, her breath fogging the glass. "He's gone!" Ethan pulled on his coat. "I'll bring him back." Collins grabbed his arm. "You'll lose yourself out there. Wait for the wind to break." But Ethan shook free. "He's my family." He stepped into the whiteout, lantern in hand, snow immediately clawing at his face. The wind howled like it meant to tear the world apart. He called Ranger's name again and again, his voice swallowed by the gale. The snow blinded him, bit through his gloves, filled his boots. He stumbled, fell, got up again. Ranger's paw prints appeared ahead, then vanished under new snow. Ethan pressed on, lungs burning, until the slope gave way beneath his feet. The world dropped out from under him. He fell, tumbling through powder and ice, crashing into a shallow ravine. The lantern shattered beside him. For a moment, all was still except the beating of his heart. He tried to stand, but pain flared in his ankle. The cold was immediate, cruel. Snowflakes clung to his eyelashes like salt. He whispered hoarsely, "Ranger." The forest didn't answer. He thought of Lily, of her small hands and the beans she'd planted that would never grow in this frost. He thought of his father, his mother, the promise he'd made to keep Lily safe. His breath slowed, the sky above him blurred. Then, a sound, a bark, distant but fierce. Ranger burst through the drifts like a storm of his own. His coat was rimed with ice, his sides heaving. He whined once, then grabbed the edge of Ethan's coat with his teeth and began pulling. "Easy, boy," Ethan gasped, though the dog didn't stop. Inch by inch, Ranger dragged him toward higher ground, paws slipping, muscles straining. Snow broke away around them like glass. When they finally reached level ground, Ethan collapsed beside him, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. "You found me," he whispered, voice cracking. "You crazy, beautiful dog. You found me." For a while, they simply lay there, the boy and the dog, sharing their breath in the endless white. When Ethan finally rose, leaning on Ranger's shoulder for balance, he saw the faint glow of the cabin lantern flickering through the trees. He limped toward it, Ranger steadying him with quiet strength. When they burst through the door, Lily screamed with relief and threw her arms around Ranger's neck, kissing his icy fur. Collins followed, his face pale but his eyes glinting with something close to pride. "You're a fool, kid," he said gruffly, "but the kind this world needs." Ethan smiled weakly. "I'm fine. He saved me." Collins knelt beside the dog, rubbing his head. "That's a true soldier," he murmured. "I've seen men with less courage." Later, when the storm began to fade, Ethan sat by the fire, Lily asleep against his arm, Ranger curled at his feet. Collins cleaned his tools in silence. The cabin creaked softly, no longer a ruin, but a home, alive, breathing with them. Ethan reached down and brushed a hand over Ranger's fur. "We're still here," he whispered. Outside, the storm's final gust swept across the hills, carrying away the last footprints of their struggle. But deep in the snow, unseen by any of them, something metallic glinted faintly under a drift, half buried, waiting. Chapter 5. The Light from the Valley. When the storm finally broke, it left behind a silence so wide that even the mountains seemed to listen. Snow still clung to the branches like ghosts, but the sky had cleared, blue and sharp as glass. Ethan stepped outside, boots sinking into the white crust, his breath curling in the air. The cold no longer bit. It merely reminded him he was alive. Ranger bounded ahead, nose buried in the drifts, tail slicing the air. Lily followed, her laughter, thin but bright, echoing off the hills like a bell. Behind them, Mr. Collins emerged from the cabin, leaning on a crude wooden cane Ethan had made for him. His coat was patched, his beard thick and streaked with silver, but his bearing had changed. There was a steadiness in his walk, a purpose that had been missing before. His eyes, gray steel once dulled by loss, now caught the morning light with something new, resolve. "I never thought I'd see the sun again," he said, gazing down the valley, "and I never thought it would look this beautiful." Ethan smiled faintly. "Guess it took a storm to remind us." Collins nodded, then turned to face him squarely. "There's something I haven't told you, son. Something you deserve to know." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Before the bridge collapsed, I wasn't just an engineer. I owned the entire project. Collins Rail Company. It's mine. The men I lost, they were under my care. I walked away because I thought the guilt would bury me. But you—" He gestured toward Ethan, toward the rebuilt firewood stack, the patched roof. "You reminded me that building isn't just about steel. It's about people. It's about saving something worth keeping." Ethan blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. "You mean, you're the boss?" Collins chuckled softly. "Was. Maybe still am, if I can find what's left of my crew." He took a long breath, the air clouding around his beard. "And if I'm lucky, maybe I can help you too." Within a day, the three of them began their descent down the mountain. The snow had softened, turning the world into a glistening sea of light. Ranger trotted ahead, leading them through the narrow pass. By dusk, the distant hum of civilization reached their ears, the faint clang of hammers, the cry of men, the rhythm of work. As they rounded a bend, Ethan stopped short. Below them, nestled in the valley, stood a sprawling rail camp, smoke rising from chimneys, figures moving between tents, the sound of life returning to the frozen wilderness. Men shouted orders, engines hissed, and the sun reflected off rows of unfinished tracks that cut across the snow like veins of silver. "That's your camp," Ethan said in awe. "Our camp," Collins corrected. "If you'll let me make it right." They were greeted by Frank Dawson, the foreman, broad-shouldered, with a thick mustache and a red wool cap pulled low over his brow. His face was leathery from wind and sun, his hands stained with grease. He'd once served under Collins years ago and thought his employer long dead. "By God," Frank exclaimed, gripping Collins's arm, "we thought you were gone with the bridge." "Nearly," Collins said with a grim smile, "but it seems the mountain had other plans." He gestured toward Ethan and Lily. "These two saved my life. Without them, I'd be another ghost under the snow." Frank knelt beside Lily, his voice gentler than his rugged face suggested. "Then I suppose we owe you both more than a thank you." He ruffled Ranger's fur, laughing. "And this beast here? What a dog! Bet he's worth 10 men in a storm." Ranger wagged his tail proudly, barking once as if to confirm it. The camp erupted in cheers, and soon the men were tossing him scraps of meat and calling him Sergeant. Lily giggled until her cheeks turned pink. As the days passed, Collins kept his word. He sent a crew of carpenters and masons up to Ashwood Hill. Not to build a mansion, he told Ethan, but a haven. Together they designed a small wooden lodge with wide windows and a beacon light visible from the valley, a place where travelers lost in the snow could find warmth and shelter. Ethan helped lift beams, Lily painted the walls with bright colors she found in crushed berries, and Ranger supervised from the porch like a proud guardian. When the first lantern was lit at the door, it cast a golden glow through the dark pines, a light strong enough to pierce even the coldest nights. Collins visited often, sometimes with supplies, sometimes just to talk. Each time, his shoulders seemed straighter, his voice lighter. "You know," he said one evening as they sat on the new porch, "I spent years building things that made men rich, but this—" He looked around, the laughter inside, the warmth of the lantern. "This might be the first thing that ever made me feel human again." Ethan nodded, the firelight dancing across his face. "Maybe this is what my father meant when he said to build something that lasts." Lily leaned against him, half asleep, her small hand clutching Ranger's ear. "We did it, Ethan," she murmured. "We really did it." He smiled down at her. "Yeah, Lil, we did." Far below, the valley shimmered with the lights of the rail camp, tiny sparks in the dark. Men worked late, laughter mixing with the clang of iron. Somewhere among them, a bell rang, a sound clear and hopeful. Ethan looked out at the stars scattered above the ridges and whispered, "We're not alone anymore." But as the wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke and oil, Collins stood quietly apart, eyes narrowing toward the east. Beyond the camp, beyond the mountain's shadow, another light flickered, a glow too steady, too deliberate to be fire. He didn't speak of it, not yet. But in that brief glint of distant flame, he saw the ghost of a bridge he thought long, buried, and something in his gut told him their peace would not last. Chapter 6: The House After the Storm. A full year had passed since the storm that nearly took everything from them. The mountains had changed, no longer cruel white giants, but guardians draped in green and silver. Spring had come and gone, summer had warmed the streams, and now autumn's golden light slanted through the trees, falling soft upon the house on Ashwood Hill. The old ruin had become something alive again. Its windows glowed warmly at dusk, the roof shone with fresh cedar shingles, and a small wooden sign hung by the door, carved with careful letters, "Ashwood Haven, a light for the lost." Ethan, now taller and stronger at 15, stood on the porch splitting firewood. His hair had darkened under the sun, his hands rough with work, yet his face held that same steady determination that had carried them through the winter. From the garden came Lily's laughter, brighter now, fuller. She wore her hair in braids and hummed as she watered rows of seedlings that would one day become trees. Her cheeks glowed with life, and her dress, patched and faded, fluttered like a flag of victory. Near the steps, Ranger lay watching them both. He was older now, his muzzle dusted with gray, his once sleek coat gone a little coarse, but his eyes remained clear, amber and loyal. He still rose with every sound from the forest, ears sharp as ever. Sometimes Ethan caught him staring toward the woods for long minutes at dawn, tail flicking slowly, as though listening to ghosts only he could hear. Ashwood Haven had become a sanctuary. Travelers and loggers passing through the valley often found their way there, drawn by the light that burned through the night above the door. Some came lost, others hungry or broken, and all left with a warm meal and a story to tell. Ethan had become a quiet kind of leader, guiding strangers to safety when snow threatened or when the fog rolled down the mountain like a living tide. Lily tended the hearth and mended clothes, her gentle hands stitching hope into every seam. One morning, as frost silvered the grass again, a wagon climbed the path toward the house. Ranger barked once, tail sweeping the porch. Ethan straightened, squinting into the rising sun. The wagon creaked to a stop, and a tall figure stepped down, Mr. Samuel Collins. He looked older, yes, but in a different way than before. The lines on his face had softened, and the sharpness in his eyes was tempered with calm. His beard was neatly trimmed, his coat clean but patched with care. He carried a leather satchel under one arm and a cane carved with a rail worker's emblem, a hammer crossed with a compass. "Mr. Collins!" Lily cried, running to him. He caught her in his arms, laughing, a sound richer than Ethan had ever heard from him. "Miss Lily," he said warmly, setting her down, "you've grown taller since I last saw you." "And you've gotten slower," she teased, grinning. Collins chuckled. "That's what happens when you spend your life climbing mountains that talk back." He turned to Ethan then, studying the young man before him. "You've changed too, lad. You look like someone who's found his place." Ethan nodded. "You taught me to draw maps. Guess I finally found the one that led home." Collins's eyes glistened. He set the satchel on the porch and unbuckled it, revealing blueprints carefully rolled and tied with twine. "These," he said, spreading them on the table, are for the expansion north, a new railway line, built the right way this time. I've named it after your valley, the Ashwood Line. It'll bring trade, travelers, maybe even schools and hospitals. This place, your place, started it all. Lily's eyes widened. So, people won't be lost anymore? That's the plan, Collins said, smiling, though some of us still get lost for the right reasons. They shared a quiet meal that afternoon, stew simmering over the fire, fresh bread on the table. Ranger sat near Collins's chair, resting his head on the man's knee. Collins stroked his fur thoughtfully. You know, he murmured, when I first met this dog, he looked at me like he could see straight through my soul. Maybe he did. I was a broken man then, but you three— He looked around the room, eyes soft. You patched me up better than any doctor could. Outside, the wind began to carry the scent of snow. The first flakes of winter drifted down like blessings, melting against the warm window glass. Ethan rose, draping a thick wool coat over Lily's shoulders. She leaned into him, smiling sleepily. It's snowing again, she whispered. He nodded. Our first snow in the new house. Ranger stood, padding slowly to the doorway. He gazed out at the falling white, ears pricked, body still proud despite the stiffness in his limbs. Collins joined him, hand resting gently on the dog's back. You know, he said softly, I used to think home was where you were born. But I was wrong. He looked at the boy, the girl, and the aging shepherd framed by golden light. Home is what you build, out of love, out of loss, out of the pieces that survive the storm. The fire cracked softly behind them. Ethan felt something deep settle in his chest. Not sadness, but peace. He turned to Lily and whispered, We made it through, Lil. She smiled. Together. The snow thickened outside, blanketing the world in silence. Ranger lay down between them, his head resting across their feet, eyes half closed as though guarding one final dream. Collins leaned back in his chair, watching the flames dance. And as the night deepened, the three of them, man, boy, girl, sat together in the glow of the hearth, a family not by blood, but by the choice to keep loving after the storm. Outside, the sign over the door creaked softly in the wind, Ashwood Haven. Its light burned steady against the darkness, a promise that even in the coldest winters, kindness could still find its way home. Sometimes God doesn't send miracles wrapped in light. He sends them covered in snow. He sends them as a lost boy, a frightened little sister, and an old dog who refuses to give up. And through their struggle, he reminds us that faith is not about waiting for the storm to end. It's about building a home while the wind still blows. Every nail Ethan hammered, every song Lily sang, every step Ranger took through the blizzard was a prayer answered in motion, a whisper from heaven saying, You are never truly alone. So, tonight when life feels cold or uncertain, look for your own Ashwood Haven, that small light you can build for someone else. Because sometimes the greatest miracle isn't found in what we receive, but in what we choose to keep giving. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a little light today. Leave a comment telling us what your Ashwood Haven looks like. And don't forget to subscribe. So, together we can keep spreading stories of faith, kindness, and second chances. May God bless you, and may He guide your heart through every storm.